Welcome to All About Capital Campaigns, a podcast that provides fuel for your nonprofit's growth. Each week, hosts Andrea Kilstedt and Amy Eisenstein, co-founders of the Capital Campaign Toolkit, provide practical tips about raising more money for your nonprofit organization. The Capital Campaign Toolkit is a support system for nonprofit leaders who are running capital campaigns. At capitalcampaigntoolkit.com, you can download a step-by-step guide for your capital campaign and get many other free resources. This podcast is recorded on a live webinar every Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can join the live session and get your questions answered by signing up today at toolkittalks.com.
All right, Sebastian, I think we are ready to go. Let me officially introduce you. You can see on your screen here Sebastian Ruth, who is the founder and director of Community Music Works, which is an organization in Providence, Rhode Island. Now, those of you who have been on these calls for a while know that every once in a while, I talk about this nifty client that I work with in Providence, Rhode Island. And guess what? Sebastian is the head of that particular organization. And I learn from him, I think, as much as he learns from me. We talk about every week or so. I think we do talk every week. And it has now been at least a couple of years. It's been quite a while. So with that, Sebastian, I am so tickled you're here with me today. And I want to turn it over to you and just invite you to tell people a little about Community Music Works.
Great. Well, thank you. It's an honor to be sitting here with you. Always a pleasure to have any opportunity to do something with Andrea. And so, just very quickly, Community Music Works, it's a chamber music ensemble and residence in several urban neighborhoods in Providence, Rhode Island. The musicians teach, perform, organize community events, and become part of the life of the community. We're trying to, over the course of 20 plus years, trying to figure out how we can kind of redefine what it means to be a classical musician in the world and have our work be as much about performing and teaching as it is about social justice and work toward racial justice in the community. So we are building a building, and thus the capital campaign we've been working on with Andrea.
So thank you. Yeah, it's a remarkable organization. And one of the reasons that I really personally enjoy getting involved with Sebastian's organization is that, as some of you know, I have a daughter who's a musician. And when Sebastian got in touch with me, it turned out that he actually knew my daughter, that he had seen my daughter years past. So we have this kind of nice personal connection around music too. That's been a special little extra treat. Sebastian, you are in your very first capital campaign, right? Ever, both personally and of course for your organization. And when you first called me, you said that you had actually raised money to purchase a piece of property for this. And I think that felt to you like a capital campaign.
Of sorts, yeah. The early stage, the very first morsel of a quick campaign, yeah.
So, and why did you have the courage to buy that land, to actually go to people and ask them for what was it? I don't know, how much did you raise for that? $250,000?
Yeah, $275, right. Well, it was on our organization's kind of drafting table for almost a decade that we were going to look to do a building. And there were several questions that we had to resolve before making the real commitment. And some of it had to do with our mission, whether it was necessary to have a building. And some of it had to do with capacity and whether we could go it alone and design and build a building from scratch, or whether we should do this in partnership with the developer, whether we should do it in partnership with another nonprofit, with a for-profit. So just looking at all the options, and after many years of looking at it, we realized, no, the best fit for this organization was going to be a purpose-built facility that we would develop. And this piece of property came up, and we said, we can always turn around and sell it again if we can't pull it off. But let's go for it. We had a couple of advisors who were philanthropic and were enthusiastic and kind of knew the nonprofit landscape and said, let's go. This will be a really good, show really good momentum when we get to a real campaign if we have raised in full the land, the purchase price of the land. So we went ahead and did it, feeling like it was, again, low risk in the sense that, if we tested it out and figured we couldn't raise the necessary funds, we could turn around and sell the land again. But knowing really that, having looked at this for so many years, that we were really headed toward doing it. Yeah.
Right. What we find on the toolkit, Sebastian, is that there are a fair number of organizations that come to us and say they want to do a capital campaign. And then it turns out that they don't have the land yet, that they haven't purchased the land, that they can't find land, as it turns out. It's not so easy for organizations to find land. And one of the hard truths of the capital campaign business is that it's very difficult to raise capital dollars until you control the land. Right? Until you at least have an option on land, until you know where it's going to be. Now, I went through some period in my career where I thought that should be possible, that people should be able to sort of agree to giving money once the land was tied down. But it turns out many donors don't have that kind of willingness. So I think it's remarkable, and I've always thought it was remarkable that you actually tied down that land, that you had the courage to ask people for what for you then felt like pretty big gifts. And then all of a sudden you're sitting there with a piece of land. And what then, right? Remember, all of you who are listening, this is Sebastian's first organization, his first campaign, right? He started this organization, fresh out of grad school? Is that right? Fresh out of undergrad school, right? So he hasn't been around the capital campaign horn at all. So put yourself in his shoes. He's all of a sudden sitting there with this piece of land, saying to himself, oh my goodness, what do I do now? Right now, I don't know if you were really saying that, Sebastian, but maybe.
Yeah, well, we knew the capital campaign was coming, and we had a director of development who had some campaign experience and kind of said, well, we need a case, we needed this, we needed that, we need to figure stuff out. And we were starting to look for a capital campaign consultant who could help us. And it was actually through a relative of mine who had served on the ACLU of Northern California board, who put me in touch with the director of development there and said, you're doing this building. They pulled off a great building project. You should talk to her. And after a great conversation with this woman, she said, Andrea might just have interest in this project. The intersection of social justice and music just might work. You should talk to Andrea. And I would say, just backing up a step, I think the thing that we were feeling really uncomfortable with was suddenly hiring a campaign consultant and turning over the conversations with our longest time friends and supporters, when it was actually this really critical moment for us to be in conversation with our longtime friends and supporters. So when I started talking with Andrea and she said she's thinking about a different model, it felt like a really nice connection. Right. So we have a 20-year history in this community. And this was a big stretch moment. So it felt like we should be sitting down with these people and deepening our relationships by having the conversation of, hey, are we crazy? Is this a good idea? Here's the vision. What advice do you have? Those are the conversations we thought we should be having. And some of the traditional ways of hiring a campaign consultant seems to be hire the consultant, give them the list. They go and confidentially have those conversations with the supporters. So when Andrea said, no, I suspect there's another way, And we could do this by having Andrea coach us in that set of conversations. It felt much more consistent with the history of our relationship with our donors.
And boy, Sebastian, did you ever come along at just the right time for me? I mean, I and Amy and I both, we have been talking about this new model for some time. In particular, I had been writing about it and talking about it and hadn't quite figured out how to do it, but knew I was onto something. And then lo and behold, I hear from Sebastian, who says, we want to work with someone who's going to let us do the interviews. So Sebastian, so now I'm afraid that, Sebastian, you didn't get the best of service in that, because I was still just making it up. And it's a good thing you're capable.
I think of it differently. Whenever we hire a musician to come do a workshop for our students, or we hire a trainer to come do professional development for our staff, I'm actually always most interested in the thing that's forefront of their mind, rather than the thing that they have in their bag. Like you hire a musician who says, yeah, I do this program, I do this program, we do this program. And you can just kind of hear them sleeping through that program. But you hire them and they say, I've always been wanting to try this thing. You're going to get the juiciest thinking. So I viewed that as like the perfect moment to have met you. You said, there's this idea we've been thinking about. And I said, well, that's very consistent with what we want. So I'm perfectly happy to be your guinea pig here.
And it was fantastic. It really was. Sebastian did an amazing job of talking to people. And of course, since then, we have now done about a dozen of these, right? And actually we have codified them in some way. So it wouldn't be so juicy anymore, Sebastian, because I know what we're doing. We know what we're doing. And in fact, we have found that that for the right organizations that are eager as you were to go and talk to your donors and willing to spend the time and energy doing that these things really are phenomenal. Right? They draw early gifts. Yours drew a very early gift. I don't know. Why don't you tell him about that if you're willing?
Yeah. So Andrea helped us develop some black and white, not glossy, but substantive this discussion guide. Right. So it was enough information to kind of communicate the vision for the project without it looking like the project was finished or formalized. And we set out with a gift range chart and spoke with maybe 20 or 25 supporters. And there was one couple in particular who had said to me years before that they'd come into some money, they would be able to help when it was time for that building. And I called them up and we had a conversation and I shared them, what was a fairly believable rendering from the architect, a fairly believable gift range chart, but it totaled $10 million as a campaign goal. And most everyone said we were crazy, that would be a big campaign in Providence for an organization our size that hadn't done a campaign before. But Andrea's advice was, and this is, I think, one of the big lessons I've learned through this whole process, was you don't back away from a number just because it's a number. You express the clear vision for what you're trying to do. And later, if you find out you can't do it, you don't do it. But not to back away by because a number looks big to you or anyone else. So yeah, this couple, we sat down with this couple, looked at this thing. They were very sort of casual and happy to think about it. And they left and he said, the way I like to do these things is I just think about it and make a decision. And that's that. I'll write to you. I'll call you in a month or so. And true to his word, within a month, we wrote a one-line email. We've decided to give $1 million to this project. So that put the whole project in motion for sure. And then there was another family foundation that had been a longtime supporter of Community Music Works, and they were kind of on to the next generation of leadership. And we initiated a conversation with them to say, really, the top gift in this pyramid is a $2.5 million gift. There's a very small number of people who could do that. you all are at the top of that list. We're trying to figure out if we're going ahead. Is this something you could consider? If yes, that'll probably put this project on the map. If no, we'll probably have to think about a different scale. And there was something kind of, strangely low pressure about that conversation, because it really was fairly matter of fact. Do you think you could think about this? And they went away and they said, this seems exciting, and we think we could think about this. And the step that I still sort of laugh at when I think back to it is, we were having a meeting of our core committee and we were talking about it, and somehow people thought, it's probably 3 million we should be asking them for, not 2.5. So I wrote to them and I said, this is great, you're thinking about it. And if you could do a $3 million gift, this would really put us in motion. And so they said yes. So anyway, between those two, we were 40% of the way there. And it was easy for the board. And there were several other really nice indications of interest. But it was very easy for our board to kind of look at it and go, no, I think 10 million looks realistic.
I love that story. I love both of those stories, Sebastian. I'm going to pivot to some questions here, and then we'll go back and I'll ask you some more. But let's see. Jacqueline, I'll come back to your question in a minute, but Jennifer has asked some specific questions for you. She wants to know your operating budget and let's see, what's the campaign goal? How far along are you? And how many donors did you have before the campaign?
So we had about 500 or 550 donors before the campaign. Our campaign goal was 10 million. It has crept north because things have been going well, and we've realized we could expand it a little. So we're up to about $7.5 million in commitments. And it looks like it's going to be closer to a $12 million campaign now. And this is a very active phase of this campaign. It's certainly not sewn up and obvious the path to success, but there's a couple of sources that are not individual fundraising that are seeming more and more likely. One is a new markets tax credits application that looks like it may be funded this summer. Another is a private foundation in Rhode Island that's interested in bricks and mortar, and we have a grant pending with them. So because of those two chunks, it gave us the confidence to raise the goal. And our time frame is that we're hoping to break ground in November and be raising money during the construction period. So for, I would say, a year and a half left in the campaign.
Yeah, there are a bunch of interesting things here from this campaign, and one of them is that of course Sebastian needed to bring his board along, both as the building costs went up, as they often do, and as the campaign goal went up, right? And that's never easy to figure out. He has a very good board, but I wouldn't say that it is put together as a fundraising board as such. And of course, the board has to really be willing to take a leap of faith. And Sebastian, I've been actually amazed and delighted as I sit in on your campaign committee meetings and your board meetings, and at how remarkably active people are and what thoughtful discussion you have. You are a master at creating meeting agendas that work, and then letting people have their say and come to agreement. How do you think about that? You do it better than I think just about anyone I've ever worked with.
Thank you. I'm not sure you're right about that. But no, I think there was a key from one of our campaign co-chairs who was a previous board chair. And he said, people come to meetings for 3 reasons. I'm sure this is familiar to many of you. But his feeling is they come to learn, socialize, and contribute. And I feel like to set up a meeting where people socialize and learn is fairly easy, right? You can, even over Zoom, you can make time for opening check-ins or, a prompt that everyone goes around and get that social dimension. Obviously more natural in person. Learning, if somebody's coming to learn, it's fairly easy to think about what you could share that would be new, that people could really take away and chew on. But I think that the hardest part is to develop something on the meeting agenda that will let everyone meaningfully contribute. And David, our one of our co-chairs, he says it's so clear as a participant when something is a fake reason for people to, you give a question you don't really need the answer to, but it's just to get everyone contributing. But to get to a real question that you're really struggling with, where people are going to be challenged to dig in for themselves and come up with something helpful, that's more challenging. So I think that's what we've been trying to do with our meeting agendas, with steering committee, lead gifts committee, is to look at what's the range of questions we're grappling with right now, and which one or ones of these could people really help us with.
It's so important, and it's so magical when it works. And I have sat in on so many meetings, not with your organization, but over the course of my career, where it hasn't worked, where you can feel that the people at the meetings are window dressing, and they're there as window dressing. Right now, it's interesting to think about this in these times of Zoom, when everybody has the choice of doing email or participating in the Zoom. Right, it becomes more important to engage people, because they can be sitting there looking as though they're engaged and be doing whatever else and still look as though they're there. In your meetings, I never get that sense. People are there. So, and I'm happy to put that out to this group, because I think that's a real skill for you all, not just in the context of a campaign, but generally as you try to engage people in your projects and in your fundraising, to get really good at making sure that every meeting has some real content that people are able to participate effectively. You can't ask people to do things that they don't know anything about, right? But so it takes a lot of thought. I mean, Sebastian spends at least as much time working on the agendas for meetings as in the meetings themselves, and that pays off in a major way. We have some good questions here, Sebastian. Gary asks, did you have real leaders on your board that took hold and were real leaders?
I guess I wonder what Gary means by real leaders. We certainly had as I said, this board chair, former board chair, who's one of our campaign co-chairs, has so much experience. I mean, really, had been an independent school head and had been a charter school head, and had, over the course of a long career, raised a lot of money and really been thoughtful. So I think this, David is a great example. For the co-chairs, we identified 3 people, including David, one of whom was a real philanthropic leader in the community for decades, someone who's given millions of dollars to many different sized organizations, big theater company, university, community centers. So it really has a lot of experience and credibility in the philanthropic community. And the third co-chair is another former board member whose children had been actually students in our programs, who was very, very tied in with elected officials, and herself had been an appointee of the governors and really kind of knew that community so well. So that felt like a really interesting balance for leading the campaign.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think my answer to that would be a little different. I mean, I think that Sebastian has done a great job of getting people, but the reality is that a lot of this campaign has rested on Sebastian's shoulders. And part of the reason it has is because he is the founder. right? It is a founders organization. Now, I have no question that this organization is going to continue long beyond Sebastian. But as the founder, it puts him in a position where he is the person that a lot of the key donors want to be in touch with. So he has taken on the lion's share of this campaign. And I think what's extraordinary to me, Sebastian, going back to this question about committees and how they work so well, is that even though you are the founder and so present in this organization, that you are able to make people have their voices heard and to bring on voices that really add to the whole discussion. It's amazing that you've been able to do that. I have dealt with a lot of founders in my career, and it's not uncommon for them simply to take over, right? And to run with everybody else sits back. And you don't let people sit back. You really don't. So are there leaders on the board? Absolutely. Are the leaders doing the bulk of the work? No. Sebastian is doing the bulk of the work. He really is, and in a wonderfully thoughtful way. Sebastian Derry wants to know the 500 donors before the campaign. Were these loyal annual donors of any amount, or how do you define how does your donor audience look?
Yeah, sure. And before that, just to point on your last comment, Andrea, I think it's an organizational value that, despite my being a founder and despite all of the sort of habits organizations have with their founders and habits that founders have, I think we've tried to be really intentional about distributed leadership. And this goes back many years to a point where my role is not a typical executive director role, but I share what might be considered a typical ED role with my colleague who's the managing director. And so that's an intentional balance, but also we just think a lot we try to think a lot in the organization to the extent it's possible about what distributed leadership looks like and how we can resist some of the habits of a founder-led organization. So just to raise up some of my colleagues who are doing amazing work, including our director of philanthropic engagement, who is just an incredibly organized and kind of data-driven person. And so I think as a team, there's a lot of complementarity there. But yeah, just to that question, the 500 donors. This is donors at any amount, from a $5 donor to a $100,000 donor. And how do we define it? Well, I think this has been a fairly stable number over the last 5 or 6 years. This 500, 550. So these are donors who give to the annual appeals. If somebody's a donor at $1,000 or up, we consider that a major gift for the annual fund. And so there are other efforts to solicit the donations of $1,000 and up. But yeah, essentially any donor that is a regular donor, we count in that group.
Great, thank you. So, Sebastian, I want to ask one more question, and then I want to hop up to Miriam Pereira's question, because I don't want to miss it before we're done, though it's not related to you in particular. But let me just ask. Frenchie has asked what your communications plan is with donors. How often do you keep in touch with them and keep them informed about the capital campaign?
Yeah, we are trying to, I would say on an ongoing basis, just circle back to everyone who has given to the campaign so far. And I would say it's not a one size fits all communication strategy. With some of our top donors, the family that gave the $3 million commitment, we're probably on the phone with them once a month to talk about updates, share bumps in the road, everything. With the land donors who gave originally, we're thinking of that group as a group. So we'll have a special event on the land in May, but because of COVID, we'll have a very kind of strict limit on the numbers who are allowed to come. Self-imposed, not imposed by the state. But so we'll make sure that all of the landowners, for instance, get an invitation to that. So we're trying to make sure everybody is connected, that 2 or 3 months don't go by without everyone who's committed getting some kind of communication. But I suspect this will get maybe more systematized as we get deeper into the campaign. And there'll be probably a campaign newsletter and things like that. I'm sure Andrea will tell us what we need to do when we get to that point.
Yes. This campaign has been, as many campaigns are, in the leadership gift phase for a long time. And one of the things that we see, again, it is not uncommon, is that lead gifts lead to other people who might give lead gifts. So some of whom may have been smaller donors to the organization, some of whom have not been donors to the organization, at least not from the very beginning. There have been a couple of significant gifts from people who were donors in the beginning and then dropped off, and then because of this have popped back up again. So this is just a long process of talking to one donor after another, and that's going to still go on for some time. Actually, we're just now looking at what the timetable of this campaign is, and it is largely driven by knowing that we have to finish the fundraising by the time the ribbon is cut. So we're looking at the timing of the shovel in the ground, the groundbreaking, and then how many months is that going to take, and knowing that we have to be done with this campaign by the end of that. Right, staying with the lead gift part of the campaign really for as long as we can, because the ideal is that they will have raised, 80% of their money, 85% of their money before they actually go to a more public part of the campaign. So all of that, these things, these timing issues all come back together. Jennifer wants to know, Donna wants to know what your annual operating budget is.
It's about 1.2 million.
Great. And Jennifer wants to know if you've added the cost of the land back into the campaign.
Yes.
Yes, right. I figured both of those. Now, let me go up to Miriam's question. Now, Sebastian, you're going to be consultant in this. This is not about your campaign. This is about a tricky problem Miriam has. We have some board members who do not want to go in a team for donor meetings to solicit a gift. Is it a good idea to let them go alone on these calls? How can we help equip them for the information they need to make an ask without making promises to donors that we as an organization can't keep? You want to kick us off for that, Sebastian? What would you say? This is the beginning of your consulting career.
This is what a good problem. That's interesting. How can we equip them with the information without making promises to donors? Yeah. I think Miriam will get her money's worth by hearing from you first. I'll add anything else I think of, but you're the one with the expertise.
So Miriam here. I would encourage your volunteers to go with the staff person if you can. I mean, that's the reason to go with the staff person, that sometimes volunteers do go out and say things that you don't want them to say. They don't know, they don't have good judgment about that. So Miriam, if you can say, gee, why don't we come along? Then we can be there to answer any questions that you have. That would be terrific. So hold that line if you can possibly do that. Beyond that, you should for sure train your board members so that they solicit gifts in a right way, that they don't go and twist people's arms or go to a cocktail party. I mean, my least favorite part of board members asking for money is that they say, all right, I'm going to see so-and-so at the country club, and I'll just pull them aside and ask for a gift, right? This is not uncommon to hear. So you need to sit down and have a real conversation with what it takes to actually having meaningful conversation about someone's gift to your campaign. If there are promises that you are specifically afraid of with particular board members, Miriam, I would encourage you to raise those before that person goes. So if you're afraid someone's going to make a promise about something and you know what's on their agenda, I would talk to them about it beforehand. And then you might want to be the one to follow up with the donor. Once the donor's made a commitment, you hang on. You could maybe not be able to hang on to the solicitation process, but you can probably hang on to following up because your solicitor is not going to want to develop that material. So have a follow-up call and find out what damage has been done. I suppose. Sebastian, what are your thoughts?
I just thought of an example that may be useful, which is we had a committee member who did want to just kind of go out and ask a lot of questions or ask for a lot of gifts. And it was difficult to slow this person down. But in the end, what we said was, why don't you go and have these conversations to see if they would like to have a follow-up, a real conversation about the project with staff, right? So that we could kind of deploy her energy. She just wanted to get out there. But we could say, great, just don't make that first conversation about a gift. If you want to share all the reasons you're excited, that's fabulous. But try to steer it back toward a conversation with a combination of staff and board.
Sebastian, you know what I love about the answer you just gave? It fits under the category of yes and answers, right? And that's a powerful way to deal with things that you're not really happy about, right? Instead of saying, no, you idiot, don't do that. We can't have you going off and asking for gifts. You say, yes, what a great idea for you to go talk to so-and-so. And I'll be happy to follow up, right, on your call so you don't have to do it all, right? So yes, and is such a great response to many things where you can change the parameters just enough to make it all acceptable and not to squash the board members or solicitors' energy, right? That's a really yes and answer. Let's see, Jacqueline, let me not lose track of your question. Is it feasible to raise gifts before there is any land in sight? So I'll tell you, Jacqueline, that's a hard thing to do. Now, you can raise money, but you can't raise money for a building that's going to go on the land when there is no land in sight. It's very challenging. So why do I say you can raise money? Well, you could probably ask donors to give you money for various other things, for planning studies, for example, right? Or for additional investments in your development shop to get ready for a campaign, or for, I don't know, there probably are other things you can raise money for. It may be that you can get someone to say, I will make a commitment to giving you money when there is land, when you have tied down land. But I have been sadly disappointed in my career over people's ability or willingness to give what I think of as contingent gifts. So it's a tough business. You should double up on your real estate committee is my advice, right? Get your real estate committee going at fast forward, while at the same time you are working on preparing for a campaign. There's a lot of preparation you can do while you're looking for land. It doesn't mean you have to stop cold. Just don't think that you may be disappointed in people's willingness to give gifts before there's land. We even had one project I worked on not so long ago where the major donor to this campaign was unwilling to make a commitment at all. The land was tied down, but the land was controlled by the city, and the major donor had misgivings about whether the city was really going to come through on some other obligations related to this. So the major donor said, come to me when you can prove to me the city is going to do what they have to do. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to give or make a commitment until then. So people play hardball about this stuff. Beware. Okay, let's see. Let's see. I think we got those. Anonymous. We always have, I think it's more than one person who's anonymous. I think different people are anonymous different times. For those donors, prospects who want to get involved, do you recommend creating a council, sort of a national council or a regional council, or other ways you would recommend people to get engaged leading into a campaign? All right. So anonymous is probably connected to a national organization, I guess, maybe. I don't know. But Sebastian, I'm going to pivot to you because here's something interesting that we've been thinking about that is on this point. So Sebastian's organization, Community Music Works, has done a fair amount of work to take the model for this and have it happen in other cities around the country. And in doing so, he has also made connection with some very well-known musicians around the country. Sebastian, how do you think about those things in the context of your campaign?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly finding real ways for donors to step up has been, I think, one of the benefits of a campaign committee structure is there are many different places to plug people in where we really have honest questions that they could help with. So I think on that level, it doesn't have to be national. But for us, we have had an artistic advisory council that's national. We don't ask anything regular of those people. We just ask that they stay in touch with us, that they'll be available for a question, and that we have folks from our Artistic Advisory Council come in as guest artists. So Andrea gave me the very sound idea that we should just call all of those people who are prominent performing musicians and at the very least inform them of what we're doing, hear what ideas and advice they have. I had a call with one of these folks last week and we walked through the building plans and they started by saying, I don't know if I'll have anything smart to say about this, but our conversation really touched on two things that were critical. One was this person's been in every major concert hall in the world. So it's like, this concert hall has this feeling and you go to this music school and it just feels really scary. And what you want is something really friendly. So did you think about this or this detail? And I immediately brought that conversation to our architects, and we agreed that actually a friendly, welcoming space is critical, and it's not simple. It's not like you paint the correct color and it'll be friendly. But that was a really neat reaction. And the other reaction was, well, when it comes time to buying a concert grand piano, call me. I'll help connect you with either a piano company that'll get us a deal, or maybe there's an orchestra that's getting ready to get rid of a very, very good used piano, and we could make an arrangement. So it was great. So I don't expect this person to make a cash gift, but if we're able to get a very good piano or a deal on many good pianos, it could be $100,000 savings to the campaign. So that was great. Just drawing on those national leaders.
I mean, there is something also about putting national leaders together. We haven't actually done this yet, but it's still on my mind, Sebastian, and sort of into some kind of an advisory group of some sort. And there is sort of a starry quality that comes from being able to put names, like actors or musicians or sort of on an advisory group. I'm never quite sure how much difference it makes, but it's fun for people who are involved to think that they're connected somehow, right? Even if they're never really connected, there is something that's alluring about that kind of a thing. To go back more specifically to your question about getting people involved through a council or a national council, a regional council, certainly we have worked with Sebastian to put together a whole host of ad hoc campaign committees, and that those are very effective. Right? There's nothing like involving people actively in order to get them to help with the campaign in a whole variety of ways. So I don't know, Sebastian, have you counted up the number of volunteers on your campaign recently? It's sort of like oobleck. It keeps growing, right? It's lots. I mean,
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the other key for us was incorporating our board members into the campaign efforts. And we didn't want the board to feel like the campaign was on a parallel track that they had nothing to do with. So we're very intentional to assign every board member to at least one campaign committee. I mean, with their consent, obviously, but to make sure that there was a real integration between all of those various levels of tasks, from lead gifts to communications to community campaign and steering committee, other things that are going on the capital campaign track, that all of those are populated with board members as well as volunteers.
Yeah, what the model that we really encourage through the Capital Campaign Toolkit, and it's one I've encouraged for many years, is the model of ad hoc committees that don't all do all of their work at the same time. They sort of come and go as the campaign goes through different phases. So, a steering committee, a lead gift committee, a communications committee, a whole variety of an events committee, a campaign kickoff committee. And these are ad hoc committees of people who can help with very specific aspects of the campaign. And you invite them just for that. And then you say, thank you so much for your wonderful service to this campaign. And some of them you invite in to serve again in some other way, and some you don't. So and there really are volunteer roles in all of these things. So it's a model that gives you very specific ways to involve people in the campaign, and that turns out to be useful, for all kinds of reasons. It's in the course of my career, I have periodically gone back at the end of a campaign and actually had my clients do a checklist of how many gifts that were given to the campaign came from people who actively volunteered on the campaign. And of course, it turns out that the number is huge. 60%, 70% of the people who made a gift of, $500 or more turn out to have been campaign volunteers. So while it feels like a lot of work, you're actually building your campaign donor base as you work through that. And I see that happening with your campaign, Sebastian, in a pretty good way. All right, Jennifer, I think that got your question answered. I'm doing my best to keep up with the questions here. Let us see here. Okay. Jennifer's also asking about board asking training, Sebastian. I'm afraid this is sort of a self-serving question for me, but I'm going to let you answer it.
Yeah.
Do you recommend a resource for training your board to ask for gifts, or I imagine training anybody to ask for gifts?
Yeah. Well, you should turn to the Capital Campaign Toolkit for that. I think Andrea has written the books as people have been referencing in here, so I'm sure there's a lot there. I think I'll just add to say that I think doing some role playing while being a little stilted and silly in the process ends up paying off. So we recently had a short ad hoc committee that was made up of board members to solicit the board for their capital campaign gifts. So I think it was 4 board members, and their task was to make sure everyone on the board was solicited. And we did a little bit of role playing, even in that group of 4, just to say, like, what's this going to feel like when we get on the phone with random board members? It was really great, and I provided some coaching to that group, and we kind of drew out the things that people were most concerned about. Wow, will it feel awkward to somebody who doesn't have a lot of means to be asked for a gift on top of their annual gift to the campaign? And so we just figured out a script of sorts that made it really clear. We were looking for everyone to participate, and it didn't have to be a dollar amount larger than their capacity. And at the same time, because Andrea had set us up with a very clear kind of rubric for getting the board to set itself a goal, everyone had already filled out a survey of it, in what range they would consider giving to this campaign. So then the solicitor could just go back and say, hey, I see you said you could give between $500 and $1,000. That's great. the board has made a stretch goal for itself. Could you see yourself giving $1,000? It set up a real structure.
Yeah, I think that was so touching actually with your board, because your board is not set up to be a fundraising board. And I think going into it, I don't think anyone would have bet on your board collectively giving $1 million to the campaign. I mean, I think that would have felt like a real stretch. And yet it happened. And I think it happened happily, right? I think everybody felt really good about it. And I think in part it was because you did a lot of work up front, right? Sort of testing to see what people would feel comfortable giving sort of privately, and then putting it together and saying, well, it really is reasonable and possible that we could raise $1 million here. We know this is possible. So I think often organizations make a mistake about board goals by just going to the board and saying, well, okay, what should the board goal be? Or by asking board members for their gifts without first establishing a board goal. So then board members have no idea what they should be giving or what that would look like collectively. So I'm a big believer in actually being very thoughtful about how you approach your board in terms of what their individual and collective gifts should or might be for a campaign. I often get the question, well, what percentage of our campaign should our board give? And of course, it all depends on who your board is, right? For me to tell Sebastian that 20% of his campaign should come from his board would be ridiculous, right? Or, if you have a board comprised of the wealthiest people in your organization, to say that it should only be 10% would be equally ridiculous. So I think that takes this whole part of the process requires a fair amount of careful and sensitive thought, so that you are asking the board to do something that they will feel proud of, that each of them can contribute to, and that they feel happy with the process of. They don't feel like they're being taken advantage of. They feel like it's a goal that fits the organization. So I was particularly pleased, Sebastian, with your process in that, and watching it play out at the board meeting when they sort of decided about, if I recall, whether the campaign goal should be $870,000 or $923,000. And I finally said, well, what if you make it a round million? And everybody raised their hand and said yes. Right? That was a funny moment.
Yeah.
It was very sweet, really. Okay, let's see where we are. We have a few remaining minutes. Here's what I want to pivot to, and I want all of you to chat in while Sebastian and I are doing this. I'm going to ask Sebastian the 3 biggest lessons he has learned in his campaign that he wants to be sure to remember. And I think if you have campaign lessons that you want to chat in about, things you want to be sure to remember, either from this call or campaign lessons you have, chat them in now. Let's do a collection of them. Sebastian, what are your 3 capital campaign lessons?
So my top 3 learnings from this campaign, I would say 1 was the idea of going for the full vision and testing it. We were so clear that we could raise top $6 million. That was our back of the napkin guess. And it was confirmed by most people we talked to, except Andrea, who said, you have no idea. The question is never that the money isn't there. The question is, do you have the vision that's sufficient for a larger goal? So that has borne out. So the idea of sticking with the full vision and testing that, and of course, we can always retreat from that. I think the next big lesson that I have learned from this is that these are not formal conversations with donors. I think that really surprised me. And they are, the kind of the more informal, the better, right? That we're going in to muse about this project that's inspiring for us, that's inspiring for the organization, and to really get their thinking on it. So that kind of I think really flipped my understanding. I thought, it's one thing for somebody to give a $10,000 annual gift, but if I'm going to go and ask them for $1 million, I better dress up and make sure this is a really sophisticated meeting. And it turns out the total reverse is true, right? The more casual the meeting, the more natural. And I think that the third piece is my third lesson learned is very related to the second, which is these are not big deal conversations. And the easier I feel about the conversation, the easier the donor can feel about the conversation. And again, I think, when Andrea kept saying, it's not really about money for people who have the capacity to give, $1 million or $500,000. The difference between those two numbers is not that significant. It's more about their inclination. And so the idea of approaching some of these things, again, not a big deal, but hey, here's this project. Here's the gift range chart. Do you see yourself making a commitment to this? We know we need a few more leadership gifts to make this happen. Do you see yourself at that level? And somehow the informality of it, the casual quality, that the fact that we're not talking about something extraordinary is just a chance for them to get involved. I think these were all surprises to me, but I think have been the key lessons.
Yeah, that's great. Those are great lessons. Isn't it funny how anxious we get the more zeros there are? So funny, right? I think because it feels like if we don't get it, we're going to die, right? Of course, that's not what's going to happen, right? So no, it takes some doing, and you've really done a wonderful job of that, Sebastian. Thank you all for your wonderful questions today. Sebastian, thank you so much for sharing your time. I know your time is not unlimited, to say the least, but it really has been so much fun to ask you about your campaign and to share with our group the lessons that you and I have learned together on this campaign. I'm sure you will continue to hear more about Sebastian and his campaign as things go through. So thank you all. Amy will be back with us next week. If any of you are interested in guided feasibility studies, you should check out the Capital Campaign Toolkit, and we can tell you more about those.
Thank you, Andrea. This has been great, and great to hear all your questions. Thank you so much for your involvement and attention here.
Thanks, Sebastian. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for joining Amy and Andrea for today's All About Capital Campaigns. To learn more about them and their work together, go to capitalcampaigntoolkit.com.